Jasper Tremaine spat tobacco juice as a Union shell screamed overhead. He barely registered the sound, his focus locked on the distant blue figures swarming around a Parrott rifle. Smoke stung his nostrils, acrid and thick. He'd already taken down 2 today. Another one, Jasper. A voice rasped beside him. It was Caleb, his spotter, face smudged with gunpowder. Jasper grunted, adjusting the sights of his Whitworth rifle. About to be, Caleb. See the fellow with the ramrod? He's next. Caleb squinted through his spyglass. Got him. Steady now, Jasper. Winds shifted a touch. The ramrod man straightened, wiping sweat from his brow. Jasper exhaled slowly, squeezing the trigger. The rifle bucked against his shoulder. He watched, mesmerized, as the man crumpled. Another blue coat down. Clean shot, Caleb breathed. Damn, you're a menace, Jasper. Just doing my part, Jasper replied, already scanning for his next target. He knew what he was doing wasn't honorable to some, but the cannons were tearing their boys apart. Someone had to stop them. He just hadn't expected to be the one to do it, Jasper replied, already scanning for his next target. He knew what he was doing wasn't honorable to some, but the cannons were tearing their boys apart. Someone had to stop them. He just hadn't expected to be the one to do it. Next, Caleb murmured, his voice tight. Look for the officer. The one shouting the loudest. Jasper nodded, his gaze sweeping over the gun crew. He spotted him. A young lieutenant, face red with exertion, barking orders near the smoking muzzle of the largest cannon. He was an easy target, but Jasper hesitated. It felt different. More calculated. He's just a boy, Jasper, Caleb said softly, as if reading his mind. But that cannon ain't showing no mercy to our boys. Jasper swallowed, the lump in his throat thick. He knew Caleb was right. It was war. Mercy was a luxury they couldn't afford. He adjusted his aim, focusing on the lieutenant's chest. He took a breath, slow, steady. Suddenly, a glint of sunlight flashed off something to the left of the cannon. Jasper squinted. A spyglass, and behind it, another sharpshooter. Confederate. He was aiming at Caleb. Without thinking, Jasper swung his rifle, firing in a split second. The crack of his Whitworth echoed across the field, almost simultaneous with the thud of the Confederate sniper hitting the ground. Caleb, Jasper shouted, scrambling towards him. Caleb was pale but unharmed. Damn, Jasper. You saved my hide. Didn't even see him. Jasper helped him up. He was lining you up good. We gotta move. They know we're here now. They scrambled back, crawling on their bellies through the tall grass. The air around them crackled with the sound of bullets. The Confederate artillery had turned its attention to them. They're gonna bracket us, Caleb yelled over the din. We gotta get out of this field. They crawled faster, the ground shaking with each cannon blast. Jasper felt a sting in his arm. He ignored it. They had to reach the woods. Finally, they tumbled into the relative safety of the trees, panting and sweating. Jasper ripped open his sleeve. A shallow graze. Nothing serious. 3 batteries in under 30 minutes, Caleb wheezed, leaning against a tree. They'll be hunting us like dogs now. But damn, Jasper, you showed 'em what for. Jasper didn't reply. He was already reloading his rifle, his eyes scanning the edge of the field. He knew they wouldn't be safe for long. He glanced at his friend. We're gonna have to move fast. And quiet. The woods offered some cover, but the Confederates wouldn't give up easily. They had embarrassed them, disrupted their artillery barrage. Now it was personal. As they moved deeper into the trees, Jasper couldn't shake the image of the young lieutenant's face. He was just a boy, caught in the same hell as they were. But war demanded sacrifices, and sometimes the hardest sacrifices were the ones that felt the most wrong. They pressed on, the silence of the woods amplifying the pounding of Jasper's heart. He knew the fight was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning, and he knew with a chilling certainty that this was only the first taste of the brutal reality of this new kind of warfare. A war where honor was a casualty, and survival was the only victory that mattered. Jasper tugged Caleb's sleeve, halting him behind a thicket of laurel. "Hear that?" he whispered, his eyes narrowed. Caleb strained his ears. "Just the wind, I think. No, horses, many of them. And they're not moving slow." Jasper crouched lower, peering through the leaves. He could make out the glint of sunlight on brass, the rhythmic thud of hooves growing louder. "Rebels," Caleb breathed, his hand instinctively going to his sidearm. "Too many for a skirmish," Jasper said, his voice barely audible. "They're hunting for us, like you said." "We gotta lose 'em." He pointed towards a steep ravine choked with undergrowth. "Down there. The creek will mask our scent. It's our only chance." They moved quickly but cautiously, descending into the ravine. The air was damp and cool, the smell of decaying leaves heavy in the air. The sound of the horses grew fainter as they reached the creek, the water icy against their boots. "Think we lost 'em?" Caleb asked, shivering. Jasper didn't answer. He was scanning the opposite bank, his rifle raised. He trusted his instincts, and right now they were screaming at him. "They'll be expecting us to run," Jasper said, finally breaking the silence. "They'll be sweeping the woods, looking for tracks." "We need to do something they won't expect." Caleb frowned. "Like what?" "Walk right up to 'em and surrender." "Like making 'em think we're somewhere else," Jasper replied, a glint in his eye. "Remember that signal fire the rebels used last night? The one up on Widow's Peak?" Caleb's eyes widened. "You can't be serious. That's suicide." "Maybe, but it's also the only way to draw them off. If they think we're trying to signal for reinforcements, they'll swarm that peak." "And what about us?" Caleb asked, his voice laced with fear. "We'll use the confusion to slip away. Head north towards the Rappahannock. It's a long shot, but it's better than waiting to be caught." The plan was reckless, bordering on insane. But Jasper's calm demeanor, his unwavering focus gave Caleb a sliver of hope. He knew that Jasper was the best shot he'd ever seen, and he trusted his judgment even when it defied logic. "All right," Caleb said, his voice firm despite his fear. "Let's do it." They waited until dusk, the shadows lengthening before they began their ascent towards Widow's Peak. The climb was treacherous, the ground loose and rocky. They moved slowly, carefully, avoiding any unnecessary noise. As they neared the summit, they could see the remains of the signal fire, a blackened circle of scorched earth. Jasper pointed to a pile of dry branches nearby. "Get that ready," he whispered. "And be quick about it." Caleb gathered the branches, his hands trembling. Jasper, meanwhile, was scanning the surrounding woods, his rifle at the ready. He knew they were exposed, vulnerable. Once the branches were piled high, Jasper pulled out his flint and steel. A few sparks, a puff of smoke, and then a flickering flame. The fire quickly grew, casting an eerie glow on their faces. "Now what?" Caleb asked, his voice tight with anxiety. "Now we wait," Jasper said, his eyes fixed on the woods below. "And hope they take the bait." The minutes stretched on, each one feeling like an eternity. The fire crackled and popped, sending plumes of smoke into the night sky. Jasper could feel the tension building, the anticipation almost unbearable. Then he heard it. The unmistakable sound of horses approaching rapidly. He nudged Caleb. "They're coming." He grabbed a handful of leaves and threw them onto the fire, creating a thick cloud of smoke. "Let's move." They scrambled down the backside of the peak, moving as quickly as they dared in the darkness. They could hear the rebels shouting as they reached the summit, their voices filled with anger and frustration. "They're here! Spread out! Find them!" Jasper and Caleb didn't stop running until they reached the bottom of the peak, their lungs burning, their legs aching. They collapsed behind a cluster of boulders, gasping for air. "Think it worked?" Caleb managed to ask. Jasper listened for a moment, then nodded. "They're all up there, searching for ghosts. They had bought themselves some time, but they knew it wouldn't last. The rebels would eventually realize they had been tricked, and then the hunt would begin again. "We need to keep moving," Jasper said, pushing himself to his feet. "North towards the Rappahannock. And this time we don't stop for anything." As they set off into the darkness, Jasper couldn't help but wonder if they were running towards freedom or simply running towards another battle. He glanced back at Widow's Peak, the signal fire still burning brightly. He knew that the war was changing, becoming more brutal, more desperate. And he knew that he, along with Caleb, was now caught in the middle of it. A small pawn in a much larger game. The game of survival. As they set off into the darkness, Jasper couldn't help but wonder if they were running towards freedom or simply running towards another battle. He glanced back at Widow's Peak, the signal fire still burning brightly. He knew that the war was changing, becoming more brutal, more desperate. And he knew that he, along with Caleb, was now caught in the middle of it. A small pawn in a much larger game. The game of survival. The air grew colder with every step. The frost bit through leather and numbed his fingers despite his gloves. Caleb shuffled along beside him, his youthful face etched with a weariness that belied his age. "Jasper," Caleb began, his voice barely a whisper against the rustling leaves, Why are they targeting the artillery now? It ain't always been like this, has it? Jasper sighed, the question hanging heavy in the air. No, son, it hasn't. Used to be a sharpshooter took out officers, maybe a flag bearer. Disrupt the command now. Now they want the guns silenced. He paused, choosing his words carefully. It's about attrition, Caleb. Wearing them down. Every cannon they lose, every trained gunner they bury, that's one less shell raining down on our boys. But why you? Caleb pressed, the question laced with a fear Jasper understood all too well. He stopped walking, turning to face Caleb fully. The moonlight filtered through the trees, casting long, dancing shadows. Because I'm good at it, Caleb. Maybe too good. He didn't elaborate, the haunted look in his eyes enough. They continued their trek north, the silence broken only by the crunch of leaves under their boots and the distant hoot of an owl. Jasper scanned the tree line constantly, his senses heightened, every rustle and snap a potential threat. He knew the rebels wouldn't give up easily. They'd be out for blood, and he and Caleb were the only targets they had. Days blurred into nights. They scavenged for food, slept in shallow hollows beneath the trees, and moved with a relentless purpose. Jasper taught Caleb how to read the land, how to move silently, how to identify edible plants. He was preparing him for a life he hoped Caleb wouldn't have to live, a life defined by war and survival. One afternoon, as they approached the outskirts of Spotsylvania County, they heard it, the unmistakable thunder of cannon fire. The ground vibrated beneath their feet, and the air filled with the acrid smell of gunpowder. Sounds like a big one, Caleb said, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and excitement. Jasper nodded grimly. Sounds like Spotsylvania Courthouse. And that means more fighting, Caleb finished, his voice flat. They pressed on, cautiously approaching the sounds of battle. As they neared the front lines, the scene that unfolded before them was one of utter chaos. Union soldiers charged across open fields, only to be mowed down by Confederate artillery fire. The air was thick with smoke and the screams of the wounded. "We need to find cover," Jasper yelled over the din, pulling Caleb towards a dense thicket of trees. From their vantage point, they could see the Confederate artillery batteries positioned on a slight rise, relentlessly pounding the Union lines. Jasper's eyes narrowed, his gaze focusing on the gun crews. "They're exposed," he muttered, more to himself than to Caleb. "Damn fools ain't even trying to conceal themselves." An idea began to form in Jasper's mind, a risky, audacious plan that could potentially turn the tide of the battle, or get them both killed. He looked at Caleb, his young face pale and drawn. "I need you to stay here," he said, his voice firm. "Keep your head down, don't move for anything." "Where are you going?" Caleb asked, his voice trembling. "I'm going to silence those guns," Jasper replied, his eyes glinting with determination. He unslung his rifle, checking the load and the sights. It was a Whitworth rifle, known for its accuracy at long range. The best rifle a sniper could ask for. This would be the ultimate test, the kind of shooting that could change the entire course of the war. "But Jasper, it's suicide," Caleb protested. "Maybe," he said, his voice grim. "But if I don't do something, those guns will keep killing our boys. And I can't just stand here and watch that happen." He patted Caleb on the shoulder, his touch surprisingly gentle. "Just stay put. I'll be back." Then, with a deep breath, Jasper melted into the undergrowth, moving silently and deliberately towards the Confederate artillery batteries. His hunt had begun. Jasper moved like a wraith, the green-gray of his homespun blending seamlessly with the Virginia woods. The air hung thick with the smell of gunpowder and damp earth, a scent he'd grown intimately familiar with over the past year. He kept low, using every bit of cover, a fallen log, a thicket of brambles, a shallow depression in the ground. He knew the Confederates wouldn't expect an attack from this direction. The terrain was considered too difficult, but difficulty was just an invitation to Jasper. He reached a small rise overlooking the first battery. The roar of the cannon was deafening, each blast shaking the ground beneath him. He could see the gunners stripped to the waist, sweat gleaming on their faces as they furiously swabbed, loaded, and fired. They were like demons feeding a fiery beast. He took his time, observing their movements, their rhythm. He needed to pick the right target, the one who seemed to be directing the others, the battery commander. Taking him out would sow chaos, buy his side precious minutes. He adjusted the Whitworth sights, compensating for the distance and the slight crosswind. He rested the rifle on a fallen branch, ensuring a steady aim. His heart hammered against his ribs, but his hands were rock steady. He breathed in, held it for a moment, and then exhaled slowly as he squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against his shoulder. A puff of smoke erupted from the barrel. Through the scope, he saw the battery commander suddenly clutch his chest, stagger, and fall. The effect was immediate. The gunners faltered, their movements losing their precision. Confusion rippled through their ranks. Jasper didn't wait to admire his handiwork. He reloaded quickly and moved on, deeper into the woods, towards the second battery. The first kill had been the hardest. Now he was operating on pure instinct, fueled by a cold, unwavering determination. The second battery was positioned on a slightly higher elevation, making it a more challenging target. But the chaos he'd sown at the first had bought him time, allowing him to approach undetected. He found a concealed position behind a cluster of rocks, offering a clear view of the gunners. This time he targeted the man responsible for aiming the cannon. Precision was everything in artillery, and without a skilled aimer, the gun was just a loud noise. He repeated the process, the same deliberate movements, the same focused breath control. Another shot, another hit. The aimer slumped over the gun, silencing it instantly. Panic began to spread. The remaining gunners scrambled for cover, unsure of where the attack was coming from. Jasper used the confusion to his advantage, moving closer, selecting his next target. He disabled the second battery in under 10 minutes, a feat that would be spoken about for years to come, but he knew he couldn't linger. He had one more battery to take out, and he was starting to feel the strain. His muscles ached, his eyes burned, and the adrenaline was starting to wear off. He reached the third battery, his movement slower now, more deliberate. This one was heavily guarded, with skirmishers patrolling the perimeter. He would have to be extra careful. He found a position in a dense thicket, almost completely obscured from view. He could hear the murmur of voices, the clatter of equipment. He peered through the leaves, trying to identify a target. Suddenly, a voice barked out, "Something's moving." "In those bushes, I saw it." Jasper froze, his heart leaping into his throat. He was exposed. He knew they'd be coming for him. "Get in there and flush him out," the voice commanded. He had no time to think. He quickly reloaded his rifle, preparing for a close-quarters fight. This was no longer a game of precision and skill. It was a fight for survival. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. He wasn't sure he could take on an entire squad of Confederate soldiers, but he was damned if he was going to go down without a fight. He had a duty to protect his fellow soldiers, to silence those guns, and he would do whatever it took to accomplish that mission. He wasn't sure he could take on an entire squad of Confederate soldiers, but he was damned if he was going to go down without a fight. He had a duty to protect his fellow soldiers, to silence those guns. And he would do whatever it took to accomplish that mission. The undergrowth rustled closer. Jasper pressed himself tighter against the earth, the damp soil chilling him to the bone. He could hear their heavy breathing, the clinking of their bayonets against their rifles. They were coming in hot, expecting an easy kill. "He's got to be wounded," one of them rasped. "No one stays put like that unless they're hit." Jasper smiled grimly. Let them think that. Let them underestimate him. He adjusted his grip on his rifle, the cold steel a comfort in his trembling hands. He'd learned a trick from an old mountain man back home, how to make the first shot count, even when adrenaline threatened to steal your aim. The first Confederate soldier burst through the thicket, his rifle raised, eyes wild with anticipation. Jasper didn't hesitate. He squeezed the trigger. The soldier crumpled, a surprised look frozen on his face. The shot was clean, through the heart. Jasper didn't wait to see him fall. He chambered another round, his movements swift and practiced. 2 more soldiers appeared, firing wildly in the direction of the shot. Bullets whizzed past Jasper's head, kicking up dirt and leaves. He ducked low, using the thick undergrowth as cover. He knew he couldn't stay here. He was pinned. He needed to move, to create a diversion. He spotted a small gully to his left, barely wide enough to crawl through. It was a risk, but it was his only chance. He dropped to his belly and started to wriggle through the mud and leaves, the sharp rocks digging into his skin. "He's getting away!" One of the Confederates shouted, "Spread out! Cut him off!" Jasper heard them crashing through the woods, their heavy boots pounding the ground. He pushed himself harder, his muscles burning with exertion. He had to get to the other side of the gully to find a new position. He finally reached the end of the gully and cautiously peeked over the edge. The Confederates were spread out, searching for him in the woods. He had a clear shot at one of them, a young boy barely old enough to shave. Jasper hesitated. He had no quarrel with this boy. He was just a pawn in a game he didn't understand. But he couldn't afford to be sentimental. He had a mission to complete. He took a deep breath and aimed his rifle. He squeezed the trigger. The boy cried out and fell to the ground, clutching his leg. Jasper felt a pang of guilt, but he pushed it aside. He had to focus. The other Confederates turned towards the sound of the gunshot. Jasper used the distraction to slip away, moving silently through the trees. He needed to find a new vantage point, a place where he could continue his work. He found it a few minutes later, a small knoll overlooking the Confederate artillery batteries. From here he had a clear view of the gun crews, their every movement exposed. He settled into position, carefully adjusting his rifle. He took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart. He was back in his element. He was a sniper, a ghost in the woods, a bringer of death. He sighted in on the nearest artillery gunner, a burly man with a thick beard. The man was shouting orders, directing the loading and firing of the cannon. He was the key to the whole operation. Jasper slowly squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against his shoulder. The gunner slumped to the ground, a crimson stain spreading across his chest. The other gunners panicked, scrambling for cover. Jasper quickly reloaded and fired again, taking down another gunner. Then another. Within minutes, the entire artillery battery was in chaos. The remaining gunners abandoned their posts, fleeing in terror. Jasper had single-handedly silenced another Confederate gun. He felt a surge of satisfaction, but it was short-lived. He knew that more Confederates would be coming soon. He had to move to find a new position. He gathered his gear and slipped away into the woods, leaving behind a trail of death and destruction. He was a lone wolf, a predator in a war-torn landscape, and he wouldn't rest until he had silenced every Confederate gun on the field. His duty, his skills would be the difference. Jasper heard the crunch of boots on leaves growing closer. He sighted down the barrel, picking out the first soldier pushing through the thicket, a raw recruit, eyes wide with fear. Jasper squeezed the trigger. The soldier dropped like a puppet with cut strings. Another shot rang out, this one snapping a twig inches from Jasper's head. They were firing blind. He needed to move, and fast. He crawled backwards, deeper into the undergrowth, reloading as he went. "He's in there. Keep firing!" The undergrowth exploded with lead. Jasper hugged the ground, feeling the sting of dirt and leaves against his face. He couldn't stay here. He spotted a shallow gully leading towards the Union lines, a desperate gamble but his only chance. He scrambled into the gully, using the meager cover it provided. Bullets whizzed overhead. He could hear the Confederates crashing through the woods, closing in. He risked a glance back. 3 of them were almost upon him, bayonets fixed. He raised his rifle, taking aim at the lead soldier. But before he could fire, a figure leaped from the trees, a blur of blue amidst the green. It was Sergeant Miller, his face a mask of grim determination, swinging his rifle like a club. Miller smashed the butt of his rifle into the face of the lead Confederate, sending him sprawling. The other 2 hesitated, surprised. Jasper seized the opportunity, firing twice. Both men fell, clutching their chests. "Jasper, get out of here. I'll cover you," Miller yelled, already engaging another group of Confederates who had emerged from the trees. Jasper didn't need to be told twice. He scrambled through the gully, bullets snapping all around him. He could hear the sounds of hand-to-hand combat behind him, the clash of steel, the screams of men. He didn't dare look back. He reached the end of the gully and burst out onto the edge of the Union lines. He was met by a scene of chaos. Soldiers were scrambling for cover. Artillery shells were exploding all around, and the air was thick with smoke and the smell of gunpowder. He collapsed behind a makeshift barricade, gasping for breath. A medic rushed over, checking him for wounds. "You all right, son?" Jasper nodded, still shaking from the adrenaline. "Yeah, I'm okay." He looked back towards the woods. The firing had died down. He didn't see Miller. A cold dread gripped his heart. Later that day, after the battle had subsided, Jasper learned that Miller had been killed, buying him the time he needed to escape. A wave of grief washed over him. Miller, the man who had taught him everything he knew about shooting, the man who had saved his life, was gone. But the guns were silent. The Confederate artillery batteries that had been raining death down on the Union lines were no longer a threat. He had done what he set out to do. In the days that followed, Jasper became a legend among his fellow soldiers. They called him the Ghost of Spotsylvania, a silent killer who could strike from anywhere. But the accolades meant little to him. He was haunted by the faces of the men he had killed and by the memory of Miller's sacrifice. The war dragged on, and Jasper continued to serve as a sniper. He became more efficient, more deadly, but he never forgot the lessons he had learned at Spotsylvania. He understood that war was not a game of skill, but a brutal struggle for survival. He knew that every shot he took had consequences, and that every life he took left a mark on his soul. The war ended, finally, with the surrender at Appomattox. Jasper returned home a changed man. He tried to put the war behind him, to forget the horrors he had witnessed. But the memories lingered, like ghosts in the shadows. He bought a small farm in the countryside, far away from the battlefields. He spent his days working the land, finding solace in the rhythm of the seasons. He married a kind woman named Sarah, and they had children. He tried to be a good husband and father, but he knew that a part of him would always be back in those woods at Spotsylvania. One evening, years later, Jasper sat on his porch, watching the sunset. His grandchildren were playing in the yard, their laughter filling the air. He closed his eyes, and he could almost hear the sounds of the war again, the crack of rifles, the roar of cannons, the screams of men. He opened his eyes and looked out at the peaceful landscape. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the fields. He saw Sarah walking towards him, a gentle smile on her face. He knew he could never truly escape the war, but he had found a way to live with it. He had found a way to find peace in the midst of the chaos. He had learned that even in the darkest of times there was still hope. He stood up and walked towards Sarah, taking her hand in his. He looked into her eyes, and he saw a lifetime of love and understanding. He knew that he was not alone. He squeezed her hand, and together they walked back towards the house, towards the light. The war was over. He was home. He was finally home. The image of the setting sun, casting long shadows across the peaceful fields, would forever be etched in his memory, a reminder of the darkness he had survived and the light he had found. He saw Sarah's face, illuminated by the warm light of the setting sun, and he knew he was no longer the boy who had entered the woods at Spotsylvania. He was a man.